Hey, everybody, it's Mark Stoos at Accelerating Value, the weekly podcast that has more and more and more of you guys tuning in to see how different people define value, invest in it, defend it, prove it, and otherwise communicate it. So these are all very, very different folks from different walks of life, different careers, different positions, different levels of seniority. A lot of them happen to be marketers, but we also talk to CFOs and CEOs and CHROs and people that work for those folks. So today we've got a really cool guest. I'm actually really excited about talking with Chris because I've been following his stuff on LinkedIn for a while. And, my impression of him, and this is the first time that we've actually spoken, so this is going to be like ultra candid and real, is that he's very much of a truth teller, and he has no problem saying what he really thinks, and he's just going to kind of give it to you that way. And I appreciate that. I really like that in a person in general, and I think it's the only way to learn and to kind of actualize what this podcast is really all about, which is to help you understand how to create value. So Chris, welcome.
Mark, really happy to be on the show. I'll drop a note for everyone here on my thoughts. I share my thoughts freely, but let's not be confused. They are rooted in data, right? And seen across hundreds of different software companies throughout the past 24 months about what's actually going on. And so when I say that this lead gen tactic isn't working, it's because I've done it myself and also looked at the data of hundreds of companies that are trying to do it and seeing it not working. And so I'm spreading the reality of the situation in a way that a lot of people don't want to accept.
No, there's a lot of sacred cows that are being gored right now, right? 2020 sort of specialized in that in many ways. One of the things that we see a lot with our customers at Proof when we talk to them about their results in the software is that if you look at what was working in 2019 versus 2020 versus the first half of 2021, it is very, very different, one to the other.
Mm-hmm.
And that if you kind of just tweaked to your 2019 program for 2020, and maybe you ditched in-person events, but otherwise ran the same playbook, you lost pretty big. What are you seeing right now? How does that jive or not jive with what you're seeing? And what do you feel like that the biggest ox in the yard is that's being gored right now after 2020?
It's interesting that you mentioned 2019 because the things that companies were running in 2019 had originated in the roots of it had originated in the late 2000s.
That's very true.
Right. And so I'm seeing a divergence of companies, the companies that are challenging the way that they've been trained to do things over the past 10 years and moving into a new direction versus the ones that are continuing to do the same things over and over and not take a lot of scrutiny on the results that they are driving. And so the core difference in the way that I see it between that divergence is a mindset, not a tactic.
Yeah.
It is a mindset of a executive team, of a CMO, and of the team underneath them about the core purpose of marketing inside of one of these companies and what is their job. And so my belief is that in 2010 or even earlier before that, the role of marketing was to generate contacts, to collect contact information so that sales could do sales to people that don't want to buy right now. That's what most companies still do when you say marketing. And I believe that the companies that are going to win in the future are companies that change that perception of marketing and create demand in the market by educating and informing people in places that they already are, and helping them to conduct their entire buying process on their own, as opposed to trying to collect contact information to do sales. And so we've seen these success stories play out for a long time. When Drift is out there, like Drift is a marketing company, not a SaaS company. They sell in a commodity space and did really good marketing, creating demand in the market for what they were selling. And they're currently winning in that category, and there's plenty of other companies that have had a similar play. And I think that just looking at some of the things that have already happened are makes it really obvious in where companies should go. And one of the things that I've done throughout my entire career, but a lot more as of recently, is start to evaluate the things that are happening in direct-to-consumer B2C, understand those things because they're signals of trends of people, of how people are buying things, how people are researching things, and then importantly, not direct copying them into B2B, but understanding the nuance of what's important and how I can translate that from selling $60 shoes to $100,000 a year software, which is typically, like I mentioned, not a direct copy and paste, but there are a lot of learnings there that that we use every day.
And one of the things that we see a lot, and I'm particularly sensitive to it, given the fact that I spent most of my marketing career in enterprise B2B, is that the big difference between, or a big difference, maybe not a big difference, but a big difference between B2C and B2B is that the buyer in B2B is dealing with a much higher cost and a much higher risk level than most B2C purchases, relatively speaking, right? And so the value of trust and confidence, let's call it brand as sort of a shorthand, right, for those two ideas, is really significant at the bottom of the funnel, much more so than at the top. And that deal acceleration, the speed with which you kind of are able to move through, particularly that bottom part, which is all due diligence and risk mitigation on the part of the customer, is really, really key as a marketer. How do you see it the same way? How do you see it?
Yeah. The core difference that I see relative to marketers between B2C, which is mainly direct-to-consumer e-commerce, versus B2B, is that in e-commerce you have direct transaction data about whether or not your marketing was successful. Right. And in B2B you have leads. Right. And that is the core difference. And so what we have right now is that we have B2B companies that have copied and pasted Google search strategies, Facebook ad strategies, and LinkedIn ad strategies to a model where the goal is to collect a lead for a certain amount of dollars as if it's revenue, as if it's e-commerce transaction revenue, and it's not. And then the gap for enterprise sales of 90 plus day sales, it could be 30, but like extended sales cycles where from where the lead is to where the revenue happens has a time lag, and marketers are not accountable and do not look at that data to understand whether or not it's even being successful from a customer acquisition cost standpoint. I find that to be the core difference, because in e-commerce, you spend the money and it's very, very clear whether or not your campaign was successful. And in B2B, I think it's very misleading, the metrics that are used to define success in advertising and general marketing today.
Yeah, no, I really agree with that. The time lag issue is arguably the issue.
Totally.
And because if you don't have a computed idea on what that is, you'll never find the value out there in the future, right?
And it's the issue and it's the opportunity at the exact same time for people, right? And so what companies will typically do is they'll put together a spreadsheet of and running their lead gen model, and they're put together conversion rate calculations that are not correct, that are overinflated, that don't actually play out in real life. They'll assume a specific cost per lead. They will hit that cost per lead target and never look at the funnel after that. And that's the thing that I see. It hurts a lot in terms of scaling a company, because with the incorrect assumptions, you actually spend a lot of money to hit the lead and you don't see the target fall down. And that's like I do believe that's the core issue.
So what do you, part of this obviously is marketing teams kind of getting a new mindset, right? But
I think it's executive. Sorry to interrupt you, but I think this is an executive level challenge, not a marketing manager level challenge.
Agree.
Yeah.
So what do you feel like that the average CEO and CFO should be doing differently with regard to their marketing team?
I think that the average CEO and CFO of a enterprise SaaS company should go and spend time with the CFO and the CEO of an enterprise SaaS company that does marketing really well and understand the differences. I think that's like, I don't think that you can replicate that in any other way than peer to peer. The core difference is that I think marketing does this over here, like the same thing that they were doing with marketing automation in 2007, versus a company like, you go talk to David Cancel at Drift and go see what the difference is in how they view marketing and how much it became a competitive advantage to them and how much it drove their business and the way that they see it and the way that they measure it. Those types of things I think are the most valuable. I think general just, and I would say this in the most respectful way possible, just I think the general lack of education around how much marketing has changed over the past 15 or 20 years and how much it influences go-to-market strategy that a CEO and a CFO really need to understand.
Yeah. So one of the things that David did there, right, was he really set the rules of play, right, within Drift on this, right? He basically said, hey, this is how we're going to keep score, and this is how you win this game as far as the business is concerned. Now, marketing team, how do you want to play this game based on these rules? Do you feel like that I mean, this is sort of a rhetorical question because I think you do feel this way, right? Do you feel like that's a key missing ingredient that many CEOs and CFOs and other people in the C-suite haven't been crystal clear with marketers about this is how you win and lose?
I think what executives need to challenge, and they should audit where they get their information that enters their organization that spreads into a strategy. And so I think that and I've asked this question to 50 or more demand marketers and CMOs, and I've gotten these answers: marketing agencies, marketing technology vendors, consulting firms that don't execute. I read it on LinkedIn or saw it in Revenue Collective from someone that may or may not understand the nuances of my business. Those are the things where that's the places where people get information on how to execute strategies today. And if you've seen the sweeping adoption of account-based marketing prescribed by Terminus today, and the amount of failures that's causing inside of companies because of the way that it's prescribed, because they took a strategy from a vendor that has a clear point of view on how you want to execute based on the ability for their platform to do it. And that's how companies are right now operating. And so I think that executives at all levels, and the last one that I'll put together is ad platforms. And I think executives should audit where their information is coming from that's driving their strategy and think about whether or not there's a better source of information about what to do. I get calls from Google, Facebook, and LinkedIn ad reps. We spend probably at this point $3 to $5 million a month on ads across those platforms for SaaS companies. I get calls from their reps pointing out things that we could be doing better, which are things that I tested 5 years ago and realized they don't work. And so I just think that people need to be a lot more thoughtful about where they get their information and thinking critically about what to do, right? The reason that Drift, I will just continue on that example, like they didn't execute the playbook that MarTech vendors are pushing. They didn't execute the playbook from a content, like some content they read on LinkedIn. They went out and executed and figured out new things that other people didn't know. And so I think people really need to adopt that mindset of like, we need to build internal IP inside of our company. We need to have very strong talent. We need to give them the space to think critically. We need to set up metrics so that they can be successful and give them space to experiment and different things like that, which breeds long-term a competitive advantage that's very difficult to replicate for a company. And it starts with the mindset, and it moves all the way down through the rest of the things that I mentioned. But I just have seen at company over company how how much different an organization is after 12 to 24 months of proper marketing execution. And it's just really hard to beat right now in terms of you're not going to be able to change. You're not going to be able to add 10 other features of your product to make it best in class within a certain period of time. You're probably not going to be able to make your sales team dramatically better unless they're already pretty bad, right? And so like marketing is really a place where I think that there's a massive opportunity that more people are picking up on than 2019. But still, I think there's a majority of the market has not moved on this, where it's been clearly obvious for 3 to 5 years that there needs to be a change here.
Yeah, they don't call it the marketing multiplier for nothing, right?
Totally. We experience that at our company right now.
So you're actually I have an embarrassment of riches here right now in terms of the segues that you have presented to me just in this conversation. So one of them I really want to latch onto, right, because you're clearly disrupting it in different ways, is the agency scene, right? So how do you where do you see the agency world in 1 year, 5 years, and 10 years from now? How's it going to be really different? How's it going to be the same? Do you feel like that? I mean, there's some pretty strong naysayers out there right now that are basically saying that the way that it is right now is going to be completely gone at some point in the distant future.
Yep.
How do you see it? What's the role of agencies going forward?
Yeah, and so just as a first caveat, I don't even consider ourselves an agency. I consider ourselves a blend, like a blend between an execution arm of an internal team mixed with a very strong consulting arm. And so it's slightly different than an agency. And the reason that I've built it this way is because I've worked in-house at companies like the ones that we do work for. And I designed it around the way that if I was going to be a VP of marketing or a CMO at this company, what I would want my partner to operate like in order to drive results for my business. So at the moment, I think the agency model should be broken already. Like especially in certain like media specifically, but there's all other places where it's busted too. It starts at misaligned interests. And so the main reason that I know that is because there's very few agencies that I've ever encountered that spend time inside of a company's CRM and are accountable to actual results. They either work on deliverables, they charge by time, or they pump out a bunch of leads and report on conversions in Google search and never take accountability at anything further. So that's one thing that's completely broken. The next thing that I think is ripe for disruption is that agencies typically build around a specific service or something like that, and then they never adopt. So you have SEO agencies or demand gen firms from 2011 that a CMO that worked with them in 2011 in 2021 asked them for a scope and gets the same scope that they got 10 years ago. Because the company has built a model and is focused on making it more profitable for themselves, not innovating for their customers. And so those are two big ones. And then the last one that I think is, at the moment, agencies are basically just told what to do. And perhaps there's probably places where companies would want to do that, right? I think that your core agency, if you had an agency of record and you went through one of them, what you want from that company is for them to tell you what to do. And the reason that you trust them to tell you what to do is because they execute across 100 companies like yours, and they do the things themselves that they tell you to do. And so it's been very, very fascinating for me and my company as we've continued to grow, how many people come in to us and say, like, we've never heard of another marketing agency before. Your marketing's so good. And I'm like, don't you think that's the problem? Like, the fact that if a marketing agency can't market themselves, why would you think they'd be good at marketing for you? And so we use our own channels, my LinkedIn profile, our podcast, the events that I put on, our influencer relationships, as a test bed to figure out new things that our customers should do. And we know them because we've done them ourselves. We know how they work and we know how much impact they drive. And so it's a very interesting model here. Like our company is built on innovation. My company is built on being 3 to 5 steps ahead of our customers, but we know which steps they should be taking next. And so I don't. I would consider ourselves more of like a growth and innovation partner than a marketing agency at the moment.
So when you think about this, right, from a kind of a time lagged perspective, right, the power of inertia, but that dissipates over time, right? And this conversation about agencies has been going on for at least a decade, if not a lot longer than that, right? How close do you think we are to a tipping point on this? And particularly, probably anyway, with the bigger firms more than the smaller ones. But you know, I mean, that's an artificial distinction at some level. Where do you think we are? I mean, do you think that things are like getting ready to tip for like real, or do you feel like we still have some inertia to cope with? Or what?
I don't think there's going to be a tip. I think it's going to be a slow transition. We see this happening more in EMEA, but it's happening in the US as well, where companies say, we don't work with agencies. And so that's the backlash that companies are putting forward right now, which is the wrong backlash for them in their best interest. The actual backlash should be, we're not going to work with agencies that do these things. And so, but I think that over time, and I talk about this myself, and I'm not like, it's weird because it's not good for me when I say this, but I do it because my job is to do whatever's in the best interest of my customer. And so I talk about this very, very openly, that companies should desire to do everything in-house on their own at some point. I think that is the way. And so you're doing everything in-house on your own, but you insert a partner or multiple partners that provide frameworks, guidance, innovation, different things like that you might not see because you only have one team. And so I think that there's a different level. I think that companies should aspire to do that because I know how much marketing can drive your business, and I know how much having control over that and having the right resources and talent and skills over time is important. Just like in 1993, companies had 2 or 3 sales reps that drove most of the revenue, and they needed them. And I believe that you will have marketers that have the same type of profile now. I think that there's a reasonable parallel there. I think that that one solid demand leader can move the needle on a company significantly more than one individual star rep. And that's just the way that I see it.
So,
but to get back to your question, I feel like companies need to think more clearly about why these relationships haven't worked. And the reason that they haven't worked are some of the things that I mentioned at the beginning, where easy signs, if you're like, we required in our scope, I want read-only access to your Salesforce instance, or we're not doing this. You cannot expect me to do a job and drive revenue if I can't see what's happening in the CRM. And so if you have a partner that doesn't do that, you might want to rethink whether or not they're the right partner. And then you should look at, do they actually execute themselves? What are they're telling me to do a podcast. Do they have a podcast? And so those are a couple of things that
totally.
I would look at.
I agree with you 100%. Right. It's the litmus test. Right. Are they eating their own dog food? Right. That is, and enjoying it. Right. Are they fattening up as a result? Right. I mean, that's really, really key. You know, one of the things that David and his team, it's a great example that you have come back to several times here, did is that they redefined their product, right, as their entire CX. And part of that was, as you alluded to, right, they're operating in a commoditized space, and so they had to do that. But I think also there's a great lesson there for many companies, and that is the CX is the product, right? So how are you thinking about that these days? Because, you know, one of the things that's challenging for most marketers is that they don't have control over the product agenda, right? So all they're left with is reframing.
in some sorry to interrupt you. In some industries, marketing drives product
Very
strategy,
true. Yeah,
just not
absolutely.
in SaaS.
Without a doubt.
Yeah. And sorry, what was your
No,
question?
no.
Just let me drop
I
that in
think
there.
so. One of the things that we should absolutely say, right, is that
Oh, it's CX, yeah.
not every market. I mean, marketers are not uniform situations, right? There's all kinds of differences across many different companies, but in a lot of companies, particularly on the B2B side, right, they don't have a lot of say over the product strategy and the roadmap, so they have to kind of define product differently. They have to increase the scope of it into CX. Are you seeing, is that still something that's being done successfully in a kind of a not, it's kind of the exception rather than the rule, or are you seeing more and more and more of that right now?
Yeah, so I'll go in two different directions
Right.
for this. The first one, this is an executive level conversation that we're about to have right now, is that companies they do not invest appropriately in the customer experience because they spend so much time and effort and money on customer acquisition. And so the first step in this entire thing is fixing customer acquisition. And the way that you fix customer acquisition is fix marketing first. Fix marketing first. It makes sales easier. You don't need to scale sales the way that you're doing right now. Instead of spending 60% of revenue on customer acquisition, you spend 35. And then you have 25% of your entire company revenue that you can spend on operations, customer success, product development, other operational infrastructure inside of your company, hiring, talent, whatever. And that's how I see companies evolving. Companies that can unlock acquisition through a better marketing model can do these things. And so I think that from a broad, high-level CX perspective, I talk to customer success leaders. I know that they get no budget. I know that they're under-resourced. I know that they don't have enough, can't do the job that they want to do, right? And so that's like one thing to do. One example of this is like companies send me emails and say, I got one earlier this week that said, we'll give you $400 to sit on a demo. And I ignored it. And so they're spending $400 to get someone to sit on a demo in a cold email that was not interested in buying their product. What if they took that $400 and tried to invest it in surprise and delight with their customers, or just generally making their customers more successful? The ROI of that would be higher, but it would be more difficult to measure. And so there's just like some really clear things that just don't feel right to me. From a marketer standpoint, if we start to move down, I've been doing this as a marketer since 2017. The reason that I've been focused on CX as a marketer since 2017 is because I was scored on revenue. And so with the CX was mainly buying experience to me at that point, but also implementation. And so when I was generating leads that we expected to have somewhere between a 90 and 120 day sales cycle through our website, in order for me to be accountable to revenue, I needed to look at what the entire experience was from there, the buying experience. How long was it taking us to follow up? Who was following up? What was the conversation? How long did it take for the person to get a demo? Who was involved? What stages are they in? Where are people dropping off? How can we optimize this? How can we make it more buyer-centric? You know what I mean? And so buying experience is, I think, a huge potential competitive advantage for companies in a sea of SaaS companies that do the exact same predictable revenue bullshit with where you go in and submit a demo, you hear back from an SDR 2 days later, you set up a meeting, they don't tell you anything, and 3 weeks pass by before you even talk to an AE or see a demo or understand pricing. And any company could go in there and deliver a better experience and win way more deals with a lesser product. I know for sure that I've bought in products that were my second or third choice because the buying experience was easier and I wasn't going to deal with it as an executive to go through someone else's process that was broken. And so that's a potential opportunity. And then when we look at the customer experience side, marketers can do this. They just don't. They're not incentivized to. They might not think their organization doesn't allow them to for whatever reason. But when I was in this in 2017, also focused on buying experience, I would go to implementations. We would do them on site at hospitals. And we would roll out 50 units and train the whole hospital. And I would go to those things and I would understand how they worked and I would understand how people were doing things. And my job as a marketer was to start to build content and information on an ongoing basis to facilitate usage. Sometimes that falls into a different team inside of certain SaaS companies, on a growth team or for whatever different reasons. But that was my job. And so my job was distributing clinical. They were using it in the ICU, but not in the ER. So I needed to go and distribute information to the people that work at that hospital about the clinical trial, about how we're significantly better than what they're doing in the ER, and they should consider using it there too. And distribute information about what type of patients to use it on, distribute information about this. And so, like, there's an interesting part of customer experience from a marketing standpoint that I don't think is being tapped into enough right now. And when I create content for my business today, I know that the impact that the content has to someone like you, who we've just speaking with today, who's been consuming the content, versus one of our customers that's been with us for 12 months is pretty much equal. I think the impact on both of those people is similar, if not greater, on the customer side, to be direct. And those are some ways that I think about how a marketer, both at the executive level or at the manager level, could think about customer experience.
Yeah, I just was totally loving what you were just saying, because it's so much about a lot of my own key learnings in, say, the last 10 years of my career, including Proof, is that, like, churn, for example. Churn is the enemy, right? In so many ways. It just hammers your op income, your profitability. It hurts your reputation. It's just bad all the way around. And it let's use the word sustainability, right? It really impairs the sustainability of your business. And so
but churn is churn is a business problem, not a customer success problem, is one thing for people to think about. And then it can come in a lot of different forms, but my belief is that the number one cause of churn is misaligned sales rep incentives or lack of a well-defined ICP.
So,
the things that actually happen pre-customer, I think, are the number one factors of churn. We've seen that in our business as well. And we've gotten a lot tighter on our ICP, and our retention rate has gone up. It's like not that complicated.
No, you're right. So I think the ICP is really key. I think there's a lot of Forrester data actually that also would totally support your point of view about when there's a gap between what the customer was promised by marketing and sales and what they actually got in terms of their overall experience, as well as things like features and functionality and all that kind of stuff, right? When the bigger that gap is, the more churn there is, right? And one of the things that we've done is we've never promised more than Proof could deliver. And our very first employee was a customer sat, CX type person, because delivering that experience, particularly in our business in the analytics space, is so key, right? Even with great software, it doesn't magically happen. And if you don't really look at it from an overall CX kind of point of view, you're overpromising, you're going to get churn. We've gotten almost no churn in 5 years. I think
we're close to there too. Yeah,
from that point of view.
Yeah, I think that right now the places that are what I would consider like quote unquote secret weapons that companies largely are not using are customer success and marketing. The core reason is that my belief, and this is a belief that is rooted in data, is that word of mouth drives most buying decisions inside of B2B today. You just can't attribute it. You don't see it because it's happening in a Slack or a DM or a text message or wherever. You don't attribute it in your software, but that's how buying decisions are being driven. And the way that you create more word of mouth in the market is you deliver an incredible experience and product and outcome for your customer, and you create a lot of good information and content that people want to share, which helps people talk about you and gives your customers more opportunities to recommend you.
Man, I could not have said it better myself. Chris, this has been a really, really terrific conversation. I think you have totally lived up to my expectations based on everything that I've been following for a number of months now. And I really appreciate the pointedness with which you have addressed a lot of these questions around value creation, because we're kind of in a very much of an uncomfortable spot, I think, overall, in terms of where companies are going next, and who's going to lead out. And we're going to see kind of a bifurcation, as you were saying at the top of the interview, between people who are doing it the old way and people who are doing it the new way and thinking new thoughts and going where the data is. So I really appreciate it. Great conversation.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
If you guys have any questions, my personal experience with Chris is that he is highly responsive, particularly on LinkedIn. And so if you listen to this podcast and you have questions, I am absolutely certain that he would love to hear from you. And if I can help you at all, you only have to ask. Thanks so much.